Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, ICE have killed a second protester in less than 3 weeks in Minneapolis. We'll discuss Keir Starmer blocking Andy Burnham from standing in a by-election because he's just too popular. Also, new figures show AI is already causing job losses in Britain. And Suella Braverman has joined Reform. That's the least surprising news we could have imagined, really. I'm Michael Walker, and I'm joined tonight by Ash Sarkar. Great to have you on, speaking to us from home.
I'm so sorry I wasn't able to come in, Michael, but the reason was simple. I just don't like being near you, so this is the only way we could make the show work.
Well, at least you're honest. Keep that attitude for the rest of the hour, because I want your genuine, unvarnished opinions. I don't want you to flatter me, nor the audience, nor anyone we might discuss. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As ever, don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments. Before we go on to our first story, we have an event coming up. Joining us for the first Downstream IRL of the year, where Aaron Bastani will be sitting down with our very own Ash Sarkar for the London launch of her book, Minority Rule, on the 16th of February, 2026, at the Air Theatre in Hackney. Most of us are getting screwed over. Our world is defined by inequality, insecurity, lack of community, and information overload. As the world burns, mega corporations are reporting record profits. How are they getting away with it? Ash, I think your job is to answer that question.
So this is the paperback launch. So obviously Minority Rule came out as a hardback, and then loads of things happened in the world of politics. I mean, when I handed in my manuscript, Donald Trump got elected. So as the book came out, there was a little bit of a gamble, which is this still going to be relevant in the world that it's emerged to? And I think I got lucky, but of course there were a whole host of things that I didn't get to consider. So the beautiful thing about a paperback is that you get to sort of sit down and write a whole chapter, which is basically miscellaneous, all the stuff that I didn't put in there the first time around. I've tried to take in some of the critiques and criticisms of the book and take them seriously. One of the points that I think was made and made quite well is that I talk a lot about the left. I don't really define what the left is. And one of the things I try and explore is that, well, if we're experiencing politics not through real life forms of organization, but through content on social media, you know, that kind of matters. And I think most people do. I talk about Zoran Mamdani. I talk about Trump's presidency so far. I talk about the Belgian Workers' Party, which is a bit of an album track politically. You know, it's a bit of a deep cut. But for those of you who are really into Marxist-Leninism, that stuff is in there just for you. So I really hope that it is a development on the hardback, and it's not just my publisher told me to do it, so I did it. And I'm really looking forward to exploring the new themes with all of you in Bullison. And Michael, I think like two cats being cautiously introduced to each other, they're letting us be in the same room that evening. I believe you're on the undercard.
I'm on the undercard, yeah. It's going to be a good evening. I'm going to be talking to Shanice McBean. And who else am I going to be talking to?
Dan Evans.
Dan Evans. Yeah. I had a mind blank. You shouldn't ask me things when they're not in my auto cue, Ash. You know I can't think on the spot. Let's go into our first story. US federal immigration and customs enforcement agents, also known as ICE, have killed a second US citizen in broad daylight in the streets of Minneapolis in the space of 3 weeks. And as with the slaying of Renee Nicole Good earlier this month, the killing of 37-year-old ICU nurse Alex Pretty has been caught on multiple videos from many different angles. It's one of those videos that's given rise to this shocking image of the moments before Pretty died on his knees with the gun of a masked US government agent pointed at the back of his head. The killing of Alex Pretty has other similarities with that of Renee Good, not least of the way figures in the Trump administration immediately occupied the airwaves to lie about what happened. This was Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem speaking just hours after the murder, giving her version of events.
An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently. Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots. Medics were on the scene immediately and attempted to deliver medical aid to the subject, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect also had 2 magazines with ammunition in them that held dozens of rounds. He also had no ID. This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
Now, every word that Noam uttered there is disproved by the video evidence. I should warn you, some of the scenes we're about to show might be upsetting. According to Noam, Pretty approached the ICE agents with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, after which the officers intended to disarm him. Now, that carries the clear implication that Pretty was holding a gun. As you can see, he wasn't. Minutes before the killing took place, he was holding a phone and remonstrating with agents. Later, Pretty is seen in the street still holding his phone as an ICE officer pushes a woman who moves to Pretty. The agent then approaches Pretty and shoves him too. Now, at that point, a third female observer approaches and is violently thrown to the ground by the agent. He then sprays Pretty, still holding just a phone, with a chemical substance, with Pretty raising his arm to protect his face. Footage from another angle shows Pretty then lifting his hand defensively before the agent pulls it down in order to spray the substance straight into his face. Within moments, several other ICE agents arrive, piling onto Pretty and forcing him to the ground. At this point, you can see an agent beating Pretty on the head with an object said by some to have been the handle of the agent's pistol as the others pile on. And those were the few seconds before Pretty was shot. At no point was he holding a weapon, and the agent that engaged with him clearly wasn't trying to disarm him of anything. Noam also said that Pretty responded with violence. Well, footage released overnight shows with little doubt where the violence was coming from.
Holy shit!
Noam went on to say that, fearing for his life and those of the agents around him, one of the ICE agents then shot Pretty defensively. That's where US President Donald Trump stepped in too. He posted this photograph showing an image of the gun that Pretty was alleged to have been carrying alongside a magazine of ammunition. In the accompanying text, Trump also called Pretty as a gunman, even though he never fired a single shot. Now, other US government figures and their supporters speculated that Pretty had attempted to draw the gun from his waistband, thus justifying, or supposedly justifying, the volley of shots fired by at least one ICE agent. But video analysis from the Washington Post suggests otherwise.
Over the next several seconds, Pretty is taken to the ground. He does not appear fully prone or to yield fully. At times, his knees are tucked beneath him as agents press down on his back and strike him. As at least 4 agents attempt to subdue him, another officer wearing a gray jacket approaches. His gloved hands appear empty. About 8 seconds after Pretty is pinned, someone can be heard shouting, "Gun." The next sequence of events happens nearly simultaneously. The agent in the gray jacket crouches and removes a gun from near Pretty's waistband. Meanwhile, another agent unholsters his firearm and aims it at Pretty's back at close range, as the others continue holding him down. The agent in the gray jacket stands and moves away, holding the weapon pointed towards the ground. The gun, with an optical attachment, is visible in his hand. As the agent departs with the gun, the first gunshot is heard, though the videos do not clearly show which agent fired. Pretty briefly rises onto one knee before collapsing, as the agent who drew his weapon fires repeatedly. As all the agents move away, another agent pulls his gun and points it at Pretty. In total, at least 10 shots appear to be fired in approximately 6 seconds.
Did they kill that guy? Are you kidding me, dude?
That analysis is backed up by sworn testimony given by 2 witnesses immediately after the event who say Pretty never drew a weapon. It almost goes without saying that Noam was lying about swift medical attention too, with a doctor reporting being held back by ICE agents, denying Pretty emergency help. Now, after spending 24 hours amplifying the lie that Pretty brandished a gun, only for the video evidence to completely disprove it, Trump administration officials have pivoted to a slightly different tack. So this was Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino on Sunday.
Did he at any point pull out his weapon?
Dana, good morning, and thanks for having me. The weapon, and we do know that the suspect did bring a weapon, a loaded 9mm high-capacity handgun, to a riot. We do know that. As far as what happened in that intervening moment with the video that you just showed, that's going to come to light through the investigation That's being investigated, and those facts and those questions will be answered soon enough.
Pretty was a legal and registered gun owner, according to Minnesota authorities. So there was nothing illegal about his carrying a gun on his person, nor was it anything unusual, since almost half of Minnesota homes own a gun, and there are no laws against carrying a concealed weapon in the state. Bill Asaley is a California state prosecutor appointed by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. He posted this on social media. If you approach law enforcement with a gun, there is a high likelihood they will be legally justified in shooting you. Don't do it. That post earned a very quick response from two powerful US lobby organizations, normally aligned with Republicans. This was the National Rifle Association, the NRA, who gave Donald Trump their biggest ever political donation of $30 million in 2016. So they said, this sentiment from the first assistant US attorney for the Central District of California is dangerous and wrong. Responsible public voices should be awaiting a full investigation, not making generalizations and demonizing law-abiding citizens. Another gun lobby group, Gun Owners of America, which regards the NRA as too liberal, was even clearer, posting this. We condemn the untoward comments of US Attorney Asaley. Federal agents are not highly likely to be legally justified in shooting concealed carry licensees who approach while lawfully carrying a firearm. The Second Amendment protects Americans' right to bear arms while protesting, a right the federal government must not infringe upon. The transparency of Noam's repeated lying about Pretty's death, as well as that of Renee Nicole Good, has now led to calls for her resignation or for her to face impeachment from Democrats. A number of Republican congresspeople have begun speaking out too, with some fearing the impact of the Department of Homeland Security's messaging on midterm elections in November. And perhaps sensing a change in the political weather, Donald Trump hasn't yet defended Noam from her critics and has put his border czar, Tom Homan, rather than Noam, in charge of the investigation into the shooting. Bias aside, though, it's not clear how useful that investigation will be. That's after ICE agents blocked Minnesota state officials from accessing the crime scene, with a judge being forced to make an order banning ICE from destroying evidence. Although I suppose they can't destroy all the video evidence, which we can see, which shows actually quite clearly what happened. Earlier today, I spoke with Branko Marcetic, a writer at Jacobin and co-host of One of 200 podcast. I began by asking him about the response across the United States to the killing of Alex Pretty.
It does feel like this particular murder by ICE has been a watershed. There was a lot of outrage, obviously, over the murder of Renee Good, but both the Trump administration, Republicans, and conservative activists had tried very aggressively to just sort of lie their way through what had happened there and kind of assume that if they just kind of asserted an alternate reality that the public would follow. And then basically what happened was that did not happen. The public had seen that killing and disagreed with the administration's presentation of the facts. I think with this one, because the video is, first of all, there's so many different videos from so many different angles of the murder, and because it's so indefensible. I mean, Alex Pretty, the man who was murdered, is, as many people have already seen, thrown on his knees on the ground with his face and stomach down. He had his firearm, the legal firearm he was in possession of at the time, removed from his person, and then he is shot 10 times. I think because in this case, there's really very, very little to no ambiguity about what has happened. It's been pretty across the board outraging. You're seeing even Republicans now coming out to say, okay, this has gone too far. Actually, a Republican candidate for the Minnesota governor's mansion just today came out and said basically he's ending his campaign and this operation has to end. It's been unmitigated disaster. He said the retribution against the state has to end. And this was a guy who, after Renee Good's killing, came out and said he would advise the ICE agent who killed him. Mm-hmm. So this was someone who, in the aftermath of that one, thought this was the politically wise thing to do, and now he has decided that this operation has to end. It's gone too far.
Sorry, just to clarify, so that was a Republican candidate for governor, was it?
Yeah, Chris Medell. And I mean, that shows you how far things have shifted. Again, I think they thought initially that if they very aggressively defended these ICE tactics and these very aggressive raids, that the public would sort of just be on board. But it turns out public opinion is very much against him on this issue. And I think Republicans, who remember just a few months out from getting this terrible drubbing at the polls last year because people did not see them as being focused on affordability, now are embroiled in yet another scandal that again has nothing to do with lowering people's prices. So they're looking at the midterms that are coming up and thinking, oh my God, we are possibly looking at an extinction level there.
And talk to me about why this is happening in Minnesota. So, I mean, obviously there's been these 2 murders within a fortnight or so. Is it that ICE agents have chosen to target Minnesota in particular, or is it just that the resistance to ICE in Minnesota has been sort of particularly organised, and then I suppose often it is the case that sort of police repression leads to more protests? Why is this happening in Minnesota?
There's a few different answers to that question. I mean, one way to remember that Minneapolis has symbolic value for Trump and the American right, because that was where the George Floyd protests of 2020 first erupted. You had some pretty destructive protests in the wake of that police killing. A police station was burned down, for instance, and so on and so forth. So they see Minneapolis as kind of the symbol of chaos and disorder and crime and rioting anyway. And so I think there's a kind of psychological need to sort of show that they are, quote unquote, replacing order in the state. But beyond that, I mean, at the same time, Minneapolis is a blue city. Minnesota is a mostly blue state, mostly Democratic voting state. It's sort of hinted at going purple, but largely it's gone for Democrats. It's governed by Tim Walz, who was the vice presidential pick against Trump. And what we've seen over the course of these ICE raids is, the last year, is that Trump does not actually send these forces into the most crime-ridden cities, as he tends to say. What he tends to do is he tends to send them to very Democratic voting cities in Democratic states. And so, Chris Medell, the person I just mentioned, the Republican candidate, he himself used the word retribution. And so that suggests that, there is some truth to the fact that when people say that Trump is kind of using this as a way to punish the people who didn't vote for him, the states who didn't vote for him, to punish his political enemies. I think there's truth to it. And remember, Minnesota and Minneapolis, they are just the latest in a list of cities that they have targeted with these massively escalated raids. Chicago was obviously on there. LA, where I am currently, that was the focus intensely last year. And there's still ICE agents around here. I was actually just talking to a friend last night who he lives in a Guatemalan Muslim neighborhood, and he says they see ICE agents hanging around there all the time, knocking on doors and go to Home Depot and so on. So, I think all of that kind of explains why Minneapolis is now on the chopping block.
How would you characterize what we're seeing in America right now? Obviously, sort of lots of people saying this is fascism, other people saying, in somewhere like Minnesota, it looks like or in Minneapolis, sorry, it looks like a civil war. I mean, what's your sort of big picture analysis? What are we looking at here?
I don't think it's a civil war. The Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, he has not sent in the National Guard or anything to defend people against ICE agents. So there isn't a federal state kind of armed confrontation as of yet. Tim Walz really has, to be honest, done little to nothing. What there has been, there's been an upsurge in grassroots resistance to all these raids. And that's actually one of the most striking things about this is that, yes, I think people are right that what we are watching is this escalation of authoritarianism by the Trump administration that is sliding in popularity every single week. But at the same time, even as the Democratic Party is largely ineffectual and, in many ways collaborating with the Trump administration to allow them to do this stuff, what is happening is there's this real rise in grassroots activism. There's people who never went to a protest in their life. That they see the scenes coming out of Minneapolis, and they decided, we have to go out there and have our voices heard and do something. So I think there's two ways you can look at it. I mean, it's a very scary time, obviously. Any leader sending armed thugs to terrorize people and, threaten political opponents and so on and so forth. That's always a scary thing. At the same time, it's not as if the American people are kind of just submissively taking this. In fact, the reason why the ICE agents and DHS agents are going so hard, I think, is because there has been such a fierce, nonviolent, civil disobedience resistance.
Talk to me about the politics, the practice of going on a demonstration or sort of being a legal observer or whatever was going on here, sort of with a gun. Because, just for a Brit, like obviously in America, it's legal to carry a gun. If you went to a protest with a gun in Britain, it would have a very different sort of significance. But, on social media, I've seen sort of people say, we need to arm up. This is why we do need to take weapons to demonstrations when ICE are there. At the same time, I don't see what use that's going to be, I suppose. It just means that ICE are going to use it as an excuse to kill you. Obviously, I'm not saying this is in any way, the guy shouldn't have taken a gun, so they didn't have an excuse. But it's just, I suppose, for a Brit, for someone from a country where no one's allowed to have a gun, this whole situation is, somewhat curious. And I wonder if you could just sort of talk me through that.
And it is for me as well as a New Zealander. We just we have a high gun ownership rates in New Zealand, but it's not as if people are packing everywhere they go. So it's a unique situation here. But it has to be remembered that this is after years where right-wing protests, you regularly see people showing up, not carrying a pistol, in their back waistband or something, but wearing full Kevlar and massive assault rifles, and they've just got their hands in them. They're going into, McDonald's and other fast food places with these things on. They people in 2020 in Michigan were angry about the COVID lockdowns, stormed the Capitol, and were heavily armed, heavily and very clearly armed. None of those people were shot. None of those people were treated with remotely the kind of violence and aggression that we're seeing from protesters who are mostly just armed with, arms in Minneapolis right now. So it's a huge double standard. Basically, it's if you are someone on the right was protesting whatever lockdowns or immigration or QAnon or God knows what. You can be armed to the teeth and you'll be totally fine. But if you happen to legally possess a concealed carry permit and are protesting a right-wing administration, then you are marked for execution, what it seems like. I think the other thing I would add is that, absolutely, the murder of this man, no one is responsible for that other than the ICE agents who attacked and killed him. However, I don't think, the lesson here is, while protesters need to bring guns. I mean, it obviously did not help here. And in fact, what we have seen, I think, over the course of this last year is that this kind of narrative that, you need the Second Amendment because an armed populace means they can resist government oppression. I'm not really sure that that's true. Clearly, it does not matter if you own a firearm. The resources of the government are just so much more vast that it's irrelevant. So all it will do, I think, is escalate the situation. But again, I do want to stress that, like you said, the responsibility of this matter is entirely on the ICE agents who killed him.
That was Branko Marcetic speaking to me earlier today. The killing of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Pretty in Minneapolis at the most extreme end of the violence people are facing there. Both immigrants detained by ICE as well as US citizens resisting them have been at the receiving end of pretty severe brutality. Now, this photo shows an ICE protester pinned to the ground while an agent shoots pepper spray straight into his eyes. It caused outrage across Minneapolis last week before the violence on the weekend eclipsed it. In the wake of the slaying this weekend, confrontations between Minnesota residents and the more than 3,000 ICE agents now in the city of Minneapolis are only growing hotter, with ICE now regularly launching tear gas and flashbangs at protesters. What's driving people onto the streets is humiliation and violence that they're witnessing their neighbours endure. So ICE agents have been accused of breaking into people's homes without a warrant before apprehending them. This 56-year-old man was dragged out of his home in freezing temperatures wearing just his underwear, despite being a naturalised US citizen. Children aren't exempt either. This ICE arrest of a child was posted online.
What is your name? Do you have a warrant for this arrest? Do you have a warrant? Yo soy legal. Keep blowing your whistle. What is your phone number?
Some of the children picked up by ICE are even younger. This is 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos, who was detained by ICE outside his school along with his father and was then taken to an immigration detention centre in Texas. Despite being said to have active legal asylum claims, both remain there. This 2-year-old girl and her father were also swept up in Minnesota and flown to a detention centre in Texas. She was only returned to her mother after a judge issued a court order. In the face of growing violence from ICE and surging numbers of detentions, some Minneapolis residents appear to be taking matters into their own hands. And when far-right activist Jake Lang tried to organise an anti-migrant protest in Minneapolis in the wake of Renee Nicole Good's murder, he was lucky to escape. Clearly lots of people very angry at him. That looks quite scary. He was pursued by protesters and he appeared to be injured as he was eventually escorted from the scenes with bruises and scrapes on his head. Some US liberals also appear to be considering even more drastic measures.
I'm generally a pretty liberal person, but when I saw videos of ICE jumping out of unmarked vehicles and nabbing people off the street, that's when I actually bought my first AR-15. So I'm pretty new to this, but the Second Amendment's for all of us. And now I'm seeing videos of Black Panthers out in Minneapolis, chasing down ICE and other police and stuff. I think that's what it's all about. We're facing tyranny right now, and I want to be prepared for if that stuff comes to my neighborhood.
What have you sort of thought about it? I've seen the same videos you're talking about. I've seen some of the stuff in person that you're kind of talking about. I've seen some people on the right wing take issue when the left arms up.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, the amendments to the Constitution are for everybody. We're all American. We all have those rights, and we should all be using them. That's my opinion on it.
Ash, I suppose what's your read on this? I've sort of seen some people say, "Well, why is everyone talking about America all the time?" But I mean, this does have global implications, doesn't it? Because it does feed into that discussion of what kind of polity is America now.
Well, I think it matters because also this is going to be something that Nigel Farage is going to be looking at very carefully if he wants to form a government. Now, there are key differences. We don't have habitually armed police, which means that we don't have habitually armed immigration enforcement. The culture around the sort of militarization of officers of the state is very, very different to ours. But in terms of the spectacle of mass roundups of those who are deemed to be illegal immigrants, regardless of whether or not they are actually illegal immigrants, regardless of not they're actually even immigrants in the first place, I think that's something which is going to be looked at quite carefully, because I think there's something which is sort of underneath the spectacle which is worth looking at, which is that the Department of Homeland Security has been quite reluctant to release hard figures about the numbers of deportations. So they're very, very keen to talk about the fact that border crossings have gone down. But in terms of like a month-to-month tracker, you're not always getting that data out of the Department of Homeland Security. So I think that there's this... I think that there are some contradictions, which is, yes, the number of people in immigration detention are at an all-time high. The number of people working for ICE, I think, according to the Department of Homeland Security themselves, they say they've increased their manpower by 120%. There's at least 12,000 more ICE officers than there were last year. But in terms of whether that's being reflected in being able to effectively remove people from the United States, there's sort of a big old shrug hang for that at the moment. So I do sort of think that the spectacle is the point. Branko used a very important word, which is retribution. The come retribution speech was a sort of, it was a really important moment in Trump's re-election. It was this idea of who's he going to punish and how. And I think that what we're seeing in Minneapolis is a cycle of retribution, provocation in terms of the horrendous levels of violence that you're seeing being meted out by ICE officers. That provocation resulting in a reaction, that reaction being street protests, forms of non-violent civil disobedience, people sort of sounding the alarm, like playing lookout for ICE officers to warn their neighbors, and then that resulting in yet more retribution, and the cycle continues. And I think that part of the gamble that's being made by Trump's advisors, particularly the likes of Stephen Miller, is that they think that they can justify further crackdowns, an even more pronounced slide into violent authoritarianism if they're able to generate an enemy within, which is a sort of disorderly protesting left. And there's something which I think is so worrying about the slippage, is that ICE isn't supposed to have powers to detain American citizens, all right? That's supposed to be for the police. And now you see them operating as, not just a policing force in Minneapolis, but sort of like violent occupiers. That's a huge expansion of their power, even though formally that's not something that they're allowed to do at all. And the final point, which I suppose is about gun ownership, I think the salient comparison here in terms of how Alex Pretty was treated by ICE, he lost his life, he was murdered, versus the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse is really important. So Kyle Rittenhouse, as others may remember, went from Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin. He was carrying an AR-15 type rifle. The prosecution, who tried to prosecute him for the shooting and deaths of 2 protesters, argued that he was being perceived as an active shooter. I don't know about you, Michael, but if I saw a guy with an AR-15 turn up at a protest, I'd think that he had bad intentions. But because of the protections afforded by the Second Amendment, Wisconsin's own open carry laws, and also the fact that protesters did attack him, perceiving him as an active shooter, he managed to get off on self-defense. Now, in terms of Minnesota, that's a concealed carry state. Alex Pretty had a permit for the gun. He was legally entitled to have that gun. It wasn't on his person when he was murdered, and yet that's being used as a justification for the use of violent force, lethal force even. The Second Amendment is, there is a sort of naivety in saying the Second Amendment is for everyone. Like, arm the left in the United States, fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do at all, but expecting the Second Amendment to protect you, I think, really misunderstands what's going on here. There's a famous aphorism about conservatives, which is the one thing they believe in, is establishing a group that the law protects but does not bind, and then another group whom the law binds but does not protect. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing here in terms of that difference between Alex Pretty and Kyle Rittenhouse.
Very interesting. Obviously, very shocking, appalling video that's now been viewed around the world. Keir Starmer is the least popular Prime Minister in modern British history. Andy Burnham is the most popular Labour politician in the country. So what was Labour's priority this weekend? Well, it was banning Andy Burnham from returning to Westminster. The decision was made by an NEC subgroup, including Keir Starmer. The group voted by 8-1 to block the Manchester mayor. Deputy Leader Lucy Powell was the only member of the committee to support Burnham's bid to stand in the Gorton and Denton by-election. MPs on the left and soft left of the party were furious. Louise Haigh said there's no point pretending we don't have a problem connecting with the public at the minute. The leadership should not feel threatened by having one of the most popular politicians in the country as part of the national team. John McDonnell had stronger words. So he said, "Do not underestimate the depth of anger people will feel about this disgusting decision. Starmer could have showed magnanimous leadership, but instead it's cowardice." Andy Burnham sort of hasn't wanted to speak properly about this to camera since the decision was made. He sort of put out a sort of boilerplate sort of statement last night. On X, though, this was more interesting. He did seem to imply Labour would now lose the by-election. Replying to Tom Baldwin, who is Keir Starmer's biographer. Tom Baldwin said, "I've always liked Andy Burnham, but the prospect of him returning to Westminster has already added to inward-looking psychodrama that does no one any good, and an unnecessary by-election for Mayor of Manchester might well have resulted in long-term damage to his reputation too." And Andy Burnham says, "I'm not sure losing a by-election does us any good either, Tom." So that sort of implies that Labour are now going to lose that Gorton and Denton by-election because Andy Burnham's been blocked. Keir Starmer's response to all of this was not particularly convincing.
Andy Burnham's doing a great job as the Mayor of Manchester, but having an election for the Mayor of Manchester when it's not necessary would divert our resources away from the elections that we must have and that we must fight and win. And resources, whether that's money or people, need to be focused on the elections that we must have, not elections that we don't have to have. And that was the basis of the NEC decision.
A lot of your MPs are really upset with you. They think it's cowardly. They think you're running scared because you're worried about a leadership challenge. Can you just address them and tell them your answer to that charge?
Millions of people will be better off if we have the continuation of a Labour government in Wales, and if we're able to win the government in Scotland and retain and win councils across England. That's really important. I think we're all united on that. The question is, how do we keep our focus there? And if we introduce elections that we don't need to have in Manchester, that would take money from the party, resource, campaigning, that won't otherwise go to Wales and Scotland and the elections that we do have. And I think for the party, they know that for millions of people, we have the opportunity to improve their lives in these elections, and we all need to be focused on that.
I mean, no one's buying it. Obviously, to sort of say it's ridiculous is I suppose to state the obvious. The thing I find most funny about it is how Keir Starmer understands elections. Because sort of like, oh, we couldn't possibly have a popular Labour politician in the news because we've got elections to fight. If you had, Andy Burnham is fighting this by-election, but also he's in the news a lot. Him and Keir Starmer standing together. There's no reason why they can't both visit Wales and Scotland. He's the most popular Labour politician in the country. And the idea that sort of, we'd have to spend a couple of million quid fighting a by-election for Manchester Mayor, and presumably a bit later in the year, but even if it was at this period of time, like having a popular person on side is much more important than a few leaflets. People don't really vote because they got a leaflet. People vote because they look at your party and think, oh, that's attractive. I want to be part of that. I feel some warmth towards it. And so having Andy Burnham front and centre looking like an ally of Keir Starmer, because, ultimately he does want to replace him, but there's no reason why, for a while, it would be useful for his leadership campaign if for a while he looks like a team player. So for the party, having Andy Burnham sort of in the tent is just an unambiguous good. For Keir Starmer, for Keir Starmer it should be irrelevant anyway because he's not going to survive until the end of the year. But for some reason, they've decided this is worth it. Ash, what's your read on this? Does Keir Starmer really think that by keeping Andy Burnham out of the House of Commons, Keir Starmer's just magically going to survive as leader?
No. But I don't think that that's really what's going on here. It's not just Keir Starmer acting alone. If you look at the composition of the NEC, where there was one lone holdout against blocking Andy Burnham, which I believe was Lucy Powell, every single individual on that National Executive Committee who wants somebody else to be the successor to Keir Starmer has an incentive to fuck over Andy Burnham. So if you're closer to McSweeney and you think that Shabana Mahmood should be the successor, obviously you block Burnham. If you want it to be Wes Streeting, you block Burnham. It's sort of unclear where Angela Rayner is in all of this. But again, if you're a sort of, diehard supporter of, Big Ange, then block Burnham. Every single person has an incentive to put their own factional interest and factional affinity ahead of what might ultimately benefit the Labour Party in this particular by-election. And if you're a student of Labour Party bloodletting, which unfortunately I have become, you'll realise that this isn't anything new. It certainly wasn't unknown to Keir Starmer in the lead up to the 2024 election. There was, of course, that dreadful stitch-up and the exclusion of Faeza Shaheen from Chingford and Woodford Green. The battles over the party machinery and the selection of candidates were a real defining feature of the Corbyn years, and even before that as well, even when you didn't have necessarily a strong socialist wing of the party, but you had a soft left and the sort of right wing of the party battling it out. Factional stitch-ups, even at the constituent party level, that's what you're trained to do. I think that if you're Andy Burnham, he may have been trying to force some kind of a crisis, some kind of move to delegitimize Keir Starmer further. In a way, it's good to be someone who is blocked from being an MP, doesn't get to be a leader, who potentially takes Labour into a 2029 general election defeat and then comes in after that. That could be something that he has an eye on. But certainly if the soft left are looking for a candidate and Andy Burnham is blocked from becoming an MP, they're going to have to look at what they've already got in the cupboard. Ed Miliband, potentially. Maybe Angela Rayner makes a return from the backbenchers at some point. But I don't think that Keir Starmer's come out well from this. He's won a small skirmish, not sure about the battle, and definitely seems to be on the losing side of the war. The one thing that he might have going for him is pursuing a tactic, which is, I don't have to win, I just have to outlive each one of my opponents and, see them 6 feet under and then win by default.
Well, that's why he tried to take out Wes Streeting, but it failed, didn't it? I mean, I keep seeing people saying this will benefit Wes Streeting, and I suppose it benefits Wes Streeting compared to Andy Burnham being in Parliament, because Andy Burnham is overwhelmingly the most popular Labour politician among members as well as the public. So he would have sort of been the ideal candidate to take on Keir Starmer. But if Wes Streeting were to sort of challenge Starmer, I'm pretty sure Angela Rayner would stand, and I don't see why she wouldn't win. So to me, it seems like the biggest winner from Andy Burnham not getting into Parliament is Angela Rayner, because she's the sort of the Labour Party membership is still soft left. I think they're going to prefer Angela Rayner to Wes Streeting. I mean, maybe that'll be a closer run than Wes Streeting versus Burnham, but I mean, Wes Streeting is the favourite to be the next Labour leader. I'm not sure I see it. Where do you see this going? I've even actually seen some reports that there might be a backlash to try and reverse this decision. I don't really see it, but where do you see this going next?
Well, one of the things that's quite interesting that's happening at the local level in Gorton and Denton is that the Muslim voters come out and endorsed the Green candidate, whoever that might be. And I think that the Green Party certainly are trying to say, look, it's a 1-2 Reform and us, and they're trying to displace Labour from the running. Ultimately, I think that if you're Andy Burnham, this doesn't discredit your political case to be Labour leader. You say, well, look, I was the only guy that could have, kept this coalition together. But there are certainly more than one party, and, I'm saying this in terms of political actor. There's more than one political actor, especially those outside the Labour Party, who want to capitalise on Keir Starmer's weakness and are quite happy to use the blatant stitch-up that was the exclusion of Andy Burnham from the running to their own advantage.
Have you been surprised? Because lots of people were talking about there will be this huge backlash if he's not allowed on. And before he was sort of blocked, Ed Miliband had sort of publicly said he wants Andy Burnham to be on the, he wants local members to be able to choose Andy Burnham if that's what they want to do. Sadiq Khan said the same thing. And I suppose when he was blocked, people might have expected a bigger blow up from Labour MPs. But I was sort of looking today for who does this backlash consist of? And it is mainly the left-wing MPs and the left-wing MPs who Starmer has never been particularly scared of. So I suppose, do they just think there's little to gain by sort of publicly going against the NEC, or just because I think the response has been a bit more muted than some people might have expected?
I mean, I think that it's still too early to go all out against Keir Starmer, right? You're 3 years out from the next general election. A lot can change. And especially with the composition of the NEC being what it is, you wouldn't want to be a soft left MP who goes up against Starmer is sacked from the cabinet, leaves the front benches, and then ultimately sees themselves, fucked over in terms of the candidate selection. And someone who's closer to Starmer and or McSweeney gets parachuted in. So it's not just about the job you currently have, it's also about your prospect of a job in the next parliament as well. And so that's why it's safe if you're a left-wing MP who Starmer's already, experimented with removing the whip from, who's also, quite frankly, in the dwindling hours of one's parliamentary career, and you don't want a job in government in 3 years' time or 5 years' time or whatever. But that's going to be a very different picture for if you've currently got a government job.
Yep, interesting. I mean, also in terms of getting rid of Keir Starmer, he's going to have a terrible elections in May in general. And then, although actually I think they've just said that the by-election is going to be at the end of February. It's going to be way before those other elections in May. So if they lose that, there will actually be quite a lot of pressure to get rid of Keir Starmer before the elections in Wales and Scotland, because he's seen as such a liability there. So it could be the case that this will actually just fast forward the toppling of Keir Starmer, because it gives those MPs an opportunity to get rid of him before the local elections instead of after, which might save Labour some seats in Wales and Scotland. So that would probably be an advisable thing. So maybe for Labour's long-term electoral future, it would be good for them to lose that by-election in Greater Manchester, in Gorton and Denton, because then they'd have the chance to change their leader. Less than 2 weeks after Robert Jenrick joined Reform, Nigel Farage's party has welcomed another Tory defector.
Thank you, Nigel, for that wonderful introduction. I feel like I've come home. Thank you. And I gotta say, what an honour it is to be with all of you. Gallant, noble, brave servicemen and women. You've put your country first. You've sacrificed. You've given us everything. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you. Thank you for everything you've done for the United Kingdom. Now, you didn't do that for applause. You didn't serve your country for reward. You did it because you believe passionately in the greatness of our country. You believe fiercely in its valour. You're not apologising for our history. You're proud of the vast contribution that Britain has made to civilization for centuries. And you have put your lives on the line in phenomenal acts of bravery, time and time again, ultimately because of love. Love of our dear country. And it's because of that same love that I am standing here today.
Ash, is watching Suella Braverman join Reform making you feel all gooey inside?
It really does make me feel a sense of warmth, because while Reform have, of course, made their pitch as being hardliners against asylum seekers, they certainly let enough former Tory ministers take refuge within their ranks. Did you get it? Did you get it as an immigration joke?
It was very good.
I mean, I wrote that down earlier today and I was like, Michael's going to fucking love this.
For the cortado, Ash.
There is actually a serious point to be made here. And the serious point is this, which is that currently Reform seem to be taking any and every defector that comes their way, Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman. And maybe part of the calculation is that it bolsters their seriousness and their readiness for government, because there are going to be all sorts of people saying, well, you've never run a government department before. They can go, oh, well, we've got all of these like highly qualified individuals, blah, 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 blah. The problem is, and again, this is sort of thinking about when might the next general election be, right? It can be any time up till July 2029, is that by the time you get there, will Reform still be able to preserve its antagonistic political identity towards the status quo? So one, you're going to have had, many more Reform-run councils, backtracking on their top line pledges. So pretty much every council that Reform runs has put up their council tax by the maximum amount, despite campaigning nationally against tax rises, including council tax. In terms of the defectors who are swelling their ranks, we're not just talking about Tory MPs who quite clearly have been on the right of their party and on the fringes of their party for a long time. Now you're talking about someone like Suella Braverman, who was directly responsible for administering the immigration regime. So I'm not sure how you can say out of one side of your mouth, the Conservative Party presided over the biggest increases in immigration this country has ever seen out of one side of your mouth. And on the other, you've got a Tory Home Secretary and a former Tory immigration minister in the shape of Robert Jenrick just sitting there. I don't know how you sell that. Candidate selection will also be an interesting one. So you've got these individuals defecting to Reform. Does this mean that they're going to stand as Reform MPs? So you've got someone who's being asked to put a cross in the box next to Suella Braverman's name. Again, immigration is the top issue for Reform voters. This isn't me saying, immigration's bad, asylum seeking is bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that's the number one issue for Reform voters. And it's a very different kettle of fish to say, put a cross in the box next to Danny Kruger than it is Suella Braverman.
Lots of people have been retweeting this tweet from Zia Yusuf. So he's sort of head of policy in Reform. I mean, he was kind of the second most important person in the party, but now all of these other people have joined. Maybe he's been pushed down to third or fourth, I'm not sure. But this is what he tweeted in July 2025. The British government learnt of the data leak in August 2023. 24,000 Afghans secretly granted asylum, costing British taxpayers up to £7 billion. The government covered it up. Who was in government? Home Secretary Suella Braverman, Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. And obviously over the past 3 weeks, both of those people have now joined Reform. So does this blunt the ability of Nigel Farage to say that, the Tories wrecked the country over the past 14 years? When I suppose both Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick can say they both resigned from government. Both of them resigned saying that, Rishi Sunak wasn't allowing them to be as tough as they might otherwise have wanted to be. So I suppose they have an answer there. And in a way, essentially, do people really care? I mean, when people vote for Reform, they're basically going to be voting for Nigel Farage, and then there will be some Tories who were fans of Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman, by the way, actually, I think was one of the most popular Tory politicians with Tory members. So, it's all well and good saying this makes Reform look like the Tories. I can't really see it doing much damage to them, but maybe I'm underrating this.
Well, again, 3 years is a long time, right? And I think that one of the things that could happen with distance is that it blunts the contrast of their political identity towards establishment parties. The other thing is that you're getting further away from Tory governments, deeper and deeper into a highly unpopular Labour government, and no one's really going to care who Nigel Farage has standing behind him on the podium. All they care about is it not being Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. That's another way of looking at it. There's another thing, which is there is a certain amount of shamelessness to Nigel Farage. He'll happily say things, one day and then say the complete opposite the next day. And one of the things that he's been able to do with these sort of, signings, as it were, of, former Tory, strikers and technical midfielders, is that he's made them do what he calls a sackcloth and ashes routine. So there has to be a degree of penitence of, now I have seen the light, now this is really my politics, and a forswearing of their former party in order to be let into the club. And maybe Nigel thinks that's enough.
And there's now a sort of movement among Tory centrists, so David Gauke, Ruth Davidson, sort of the people who were quite big in the Cameron era, Andy Street, who was Birmingham mayor, who their argument is basically now all of these right-wingers, sort of anti-migrant, sort of populist right people are moving over to Reform. The Tories can now become this sensible centre-right party again, who are reasonably socially liberal and fiscally conservative. I mean, do you see that as something that could happen? And, should the Tories do that now? Do they need us? Is that where the gap of the market is to be the sort of centrist party for people who just want neoliberalism back? Or do they have to compete with Reform for that space on the anti-migrant right? Or should the Tories just merge with Reform if they really want to, be relevant in the next general election? It's so difficult to guess what's going to happen at the next general election because it is now like a 5-party system. And I suppose I don't know if you have any predictions or how we should read that in terms of what could happen over the next few years.
Don't put me on the spot and say, will you make predictions? It's like, hey, Ash, do you want to be a hostage to fortune? No, I do not want to be a hostage to fortune. What I will say is this, is that if you're someone like Ruth Davidson and you're like, well, finally, all of these, headbanging Brexiteers have gone and we can get back to being a proper centre-right party, that's a little bit like saying, great, now all those rats have gone, we can really have a good time on this here Titanic. I think that it doesn't get to grips with the fact that the real problem is that the entire material basis for their political and economic worldview has fallen away, and the music stopped and they're still dancing. Right? That's their real problem. And I don't think whether Suella Braverman is inside the tent pissing out or outside the tent pissing in really makes a difference to those fundamentals. In terms of reviving the centre-right in the UK, obviously once something becomes a 5-party race rather than a 2-party race, picking up seats might not mean that you form a government, but you could position yourself as something of a kingmaker if you get the electoral geography right, if you have good voter turnout, if you have a party machine with, decades, centuries of experience, as the Conservative Party do. But I get the feeling that that won't be enough. I don't see anyone really clamouring for the return of David Cameron at the moment. And again, if you're sort of a Cameroon, and you think about the geographic spread of people with those voting patterns, wouldn't you just vote Lib Dem? There's already a party for you there. So I think the real problem for the Conservative Party is that they're finding themselves squeezed on both sides. I mean, don't forget, like one of the most bruising by-election results of recent years was Chesham and Amersham, which was a Tory to Lib Dem switch.
Yeah, and I suppose Reformer maybe think if they're getting all these Tory has-beens, whether or not they get votes, they might think actually the biggest risk to Reform is what happens after they win an election if they've got absolutely no idea how government works. And having, even if these people are like idiots, they at least know where different things happen. They've got some governing experience. I mentioned at the start of the show we're going to talk about an AI jobs apocalypse. I'm actually going to save that for Wednesday with Aaron because I decided we didn't have time today because we talked about that first story for a long time because it's a very, very important one. Ash Sarkar, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
You know what? You've won me over. You've warmed me up, and I'll be in the studio with you next Monday.
Oh, thank God. I'll make sure I wash. I don't want you to just come back next week and then decide you don't want to come in again. So I'm going to make it really pleasant in here. I'll bring in incense sticks, little candles. It's going to be gorgeous. Biscuits. Thank you guys all for watching. We'll be back tomorrow from 6 p.m. on Tuesday. I'll be back on Wednesday with Aaron at 6 p.m. Have a good night. You've been watching Novara Media. See you later.